The problems kept surfacing, though. Most of them originated with Ace, who kept shooting himself in the foot, and Peter kept following right along. At one point, Ace started saying, "That's it, I'm leaving. I'm going to do my own solo record." So Bill Aucoin said, "Look, don't leave the band. Let's all do solo records. Maybe what we need is time away from each other." Everybody agreed.
Paul Stanley. Gene Simmons. Peter Criss. Ace Frehley. The Kiss albums, one by each of the 4 Kiss stars on Casablanca Records and Tapes.
Around the time of that concert at Magic Mountain, Ace had first announced he wanted to leave the band. We held a band meeting on the lot where we were shooting the movie. In response, Bill and Neil had almost immediately hit on an idea to hold us together. "You don't have to leave the band," Bill said. "We'll do solo albums." That turned out to be our next folly. Neil said we would release them all on the same day. He envisioned shipping 1 million of each solo album. Bill had the idea to maintain some cohesiveness by having one artist do all 4 covers, and he suggested dedicating each album to the other guys in the band to keep up the mythology. Despite the dedications, we wished each other anything but good luck.
I see you walking down the street, you're turning into paradise. The boys are crowding at your feet, burn them and turn them to ice. No one gets a piece of your heart, it's all because you won't let it start. You keep your love in chains, love in chains, and only fear remains, and keeps your love in chains.
So, after wrapping up Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, we each went off to make an album with no knowledge of what the others were doing. I had a lot of fun, actually. I didn't want to stray far from what Kiss did, but it was great to be able to work with no tensions, no egos, and surrounded by talent. I started cutting demos at Electric Lady in New York, then went back out to LA to re-record them. After we cut a few of the songs, I realized they just didn't sound right. The demos might not have been perfect or the most fidelic, but they captured what I was looking for, so I decided to keep them and finish them. I liked the spontaneity and rawness. Then I cut another 4 or 5 new songs in LA. I had a band in New York and another one in Los Angeles. The only person who was in both was Bob Kulick.
Though I know that you are sleeping, girl, there's something I must say. Though the road may wind, my love will find the way. Many miles have come between us, and the days they come and go. Still with all we feel, it never really shows. Hold me, touch me.
As for the songs, Hold Me, Touch Me was about Georgianne. I had flown off to see her frequently during downtime, and the song came from being away from her and hoping she was thinking of me when we weren't together. Most of the songs, however, were about Carol Kaye, a stunner in Bill Aucoin's publicity department, whom I was seeing at the time and was crazy about. She was funny and smart and loved music, and the heat we generated at times could peel paint. Carol was romantically involved with someone else too, and I had been trying my damnedest to get her to stop seeing him. I basked in the drama of that classic love triangle, but I was desperate to pull her away from him. Tonight You Belong to Me and Wouldn't You Like to Know Me are about her.
In a dream, a long time ago, we fell in love, but what did we know? Years seem to pass as time took its toll. You're here at last, tonight you belong to me. Yeah. Yes, tonight you belong to me.
Tonight remained one of my favorite songs because of that tear your heart out passion and pain that I knew so well. Funny though, because the night Carol finally said, "Okay, I'll stop seeing him," it was as if somebody had turned a hose onto the bed where we were lying. I was suddenly drenched in sweat. I had a full-on panic attack. I searched for the right words, mumbling, trying to backpedal my way out, and come up with a plausible explanation for why I suddenly looked like I'd just gotten out of the shower. The truth was that so much of my life was about chasing approval, chasing acknowledgement, and chasing love that when confronted with the chance to actually get approval, acknowledgement, and love, I was stunned. The reaction surprised me because in my mind I really thought being with her was the answer. But it was safer to just chase things. I wasn't equipped for the real thing.
I've been lonely, but I feel alright. You got another, baby, hold him tight. You know you've been pushing and you won't get me tonight. I've been your lover, but I'm not your fool. You wanna teach me, but I'm not in school. You know you've been pushing and you won't get me tonight. You come a-calling, but you're much too late. You got the key, but babe, I locked the gate. I tried to call you when you were not home. Nobody likes to spend the night so low. Wouldn't you like to know me? And wouldn't you like to show me you care? Wouldn't you
Needless to say, she didn't stop seeing her other guy after all. I decided to mix my solo album in London at a legendary old-school studio called Trident. I wanted to fly there on the Concorde, something I'd never done. Somewhere over the Atlantic, it struck me that the plane wasn't level. It was flying at an angle. But what did I know? Then the pilot came on the PA and said in a calm voice, "This is your captain speaking. Now, folks, you may have noticed we're flying at a slight angle. We've lost an engine." We're in the middle of the fucking Atlantic with one engine. We're on our way back to Kennedy Airport. If we're flying on one engine, why don't we go down to about 5 feet above the water instead of 55,000 feet above it? The captain came on 10 minutes later. We're using more fuel than expected because we're flying subsonic, so we're not going to make it to New York. That's not good. We're going to divert to Nova Scotia. I don't like this at all. Why are we so damn high up? Before too long, the same calm voice came on again. We're not going to make Nova Scotia. Where on earth are we going to go? We're going to land at Gander Airport in Newfoundland. We need a long runway. We made it to Gander and landed. They paired people up and shuttled us off to a local motel. I said there was no fucking way I was bunking with someone. The next day, a DC-10 made an unscheduled stop and picked us up. They kept us in a sequestered compartment away from everyone else. What should have taken 3.5 hours ended up taking 17 hours. But once in London, I enjoyed it this time.
My eyes were burning, looking back on all of my memories, and my mind was dreaming like it does. She was white, and in the night we made love. Together, I remember together as one. It came so easy, but now it seems so long ago. My chance is fading into none. I can't change or rearrange what I've done. Together, I remember together as one. Together,
first time I met Cher, it was 1978 at a party Neil Bogart was throwing for Casablanca. I didn't really know any of the other people there. I knew some by face and by reputation, but not personally. At some point in the evening, I found myself talking to Cher. I introduced myself, and she didn't believe that I was who I said I was. It turned out that her daughter, Chastity, was a Kiss fan and had encouraged her mother to go to the party because she knew Gene Simmons would be there. But Cher apparently had it in her mind that she would be meeting Gene Simmons, the movie actress. She didn't make the connection. At that time, I was starting to think of ideas for my solo album, which I envisioned as a big production, with tons of guest stars and a circus atmosphere. I thought it would be great if I could get Cher to sing on the record. At the end of the night, I went over to her place. In the limo with us was Welcome Back Kotter's Marcia Strassman, who warned Cher about my wandering eyes. Normally, this would have meant one thing, and one thing only, but in this case it meant something else entirely. We were back at her place, and before I knew it, we were talking about our lives, about where we had come from, about what we were like as children. She was smart, interesting, and funny. At that moment, at least, I set aside the thought of it turning into anything sexual. The night went on, and Cher made some hot chocolate for the two of us, and we kept talking about things, her life, my record. She seemed interested in the fact that even though I was a rock and roller, I could put a sentence together, and also in the fact that I was straight and had never been drunk. Cher had just come out of a relationship with Greg Allman, who had a reported serious substance abuse problem. Cher herself was always anti-drug. In New York, we were working on a new greatest hits album, Double Platinum, and specifically on a new disco version of Strutter. This was Neil Bogart's idea. He wanted to mix his two biggest properties, which were Kiss and disco. It was pretty much the same song except for the drum track, which was added on later. I didn't care for the version and didn't really have much to do with it. At any rate, right when we finished recording the new version, I told the other guys that I had to leave. I was going out to California to see what was happening with the Cher situation. If you had known me at any time before that, you would have been sure that the guy standing in front of you in the studio was an imposter, leaving without putting the final touches on a song and flying off to see a girl just wasn't something I did. But I was new to this relationship thing. Within the Kiss world, the fact that I had gone to California was causing some ripples of discontent. For starters, Ace and Peter didn't like it. They thought it meant they were a secondary priority, that something else was more important to me, and they felt threatened by it. It was similar in some regard to what happened with the early British bands. Managers routinely suppressed information about the band members' steady girlfriends, and in some cases even wives, because those realities didn't harmonize with the way fans wanted to see their pop idols. This situation was roughly equivalent. Kiss fans wanted to see us as hard-working, tough-living New York musicians, reviled by critics, aggressively outside the rock establishment. The idea that one of us was living in California with a huge pop star, a huge television star, wasn't immediately accepted. The one person who understood my situation, even though at first he didn't approve, was Paul. He had gotten a taste of California over the years. Whenever we had stopped there to record or tour, and when I went out west to live with Cher, he started to see Cher's sister, Georgianne. They got along so well that I thought they were going to get married. It didn't happen. Life with Cher was a real adjustment. To start with, I had a whole new group of friends. Actually, that's not quite accurate. They were more like acquaintances, mostly people Cher was close to, from Dolly Parton to Kate Jackson to Jane Fonda. At first I felt quite awkward about that situation because the idea of celebrities hanging out with celebrities always struck me as a bit odd. Slowly, though, I got more comfortable. The fact that they were actors and not musicians helped. For one thing, actors could put a sentence together. That's a huge difference. That's their business. And they were able to appear in public without being seen as freaks. Being in KISS, by contrast, didn't prepare us for the social world. We didn't have very good people skills because we were so sheltered. Nobody even knew what we looked like without makeup, and we hardly ever saw people except in hotel rooms, because we were always hiding from the paparazzi. I remember once Cher woke me up early in the morning. We had moved to her Malibu home. I said, "What? What?" It must have been 6 in the morning. "Let's go running," she said. "Where to?" I put on my leather pants and silk shirt and snakeskin boots. "You can't dress like that," she said. "Why not?" "Well, you've got to put on these sneakers and shorts because we're going to go run on the beach." "Why?" I said. I was dumbfounded. I mean, you didn't do that in New York, not in 1978. And where were you going to run anyway? It was something you did when somebody was chasing you. So we went. There I was, running alongside Cher in my snakeskin boots, and I could barely stand up because my boots were sinking into the sand. And out on the beach suddenly, I saw Neil Diamond and then Barbra Streisand. It was like I was on another planet. After a little while in California, I got distracted a bit from the rock and roll world. Even though I had always loved movies and wanted to explore that field, I was still a guy in a band. I didn't have a clue how to get into it, who the studio executives were, or what the structure was. But I started to get immersed in that world, mostly through Cher, who wasn't yet a movie star but was trying to break into film. People magazine did a couple of cover stories about Cher's and my relationship, and though I was used to the idea that photographers tried to capture me without my Kiss makeup, this kicked it up tremendously. We were constantly hounded by paparazzi, night and day. I started covering my face with handkerchiefs like a bandit. Most of the time, my life with Cher was great. Everything was hilarious. Everything was funny. I'd run down the street with her on my back. It was like we were two young kids. Once we went into a Westwood store, and Cher and her sister Georgianne decided to walk down the street for a second. I said, "I'll just look around the bookstore." I was wearing Samoans and very short shorts for the first time, standard issue California dress. And I saw a couple pointing toward me, and I'm going, "Yeah, what are you looking at?" "Okay, so I'm in Kiss, and I'm dressed this way, and I'm browsing in a bookstore." Big deal. It's a New York thing. You're confrontational. So they turned around and walked away. When I walked over to Cher, I told her about it. "Can you imagine those people were staring at me? So what? So I'm in Kiss." "They weren't looking at you. Your balls are hanging out from your shorts." I looked down, and sure enough, they were. They might as well have had a neon sign around them. Likewise, when I took Cher to the Tavern on the Green in New York City, and we were having dinner, I saw flash bulbs going off at my back. "Look," I said to Cher, "this is so rude. I'll take care of it." "No, it's okay," she said. "I'm used to this." "It's my job," I said. I was insistent. "I'm the man. I'll take care of this." I got up and walked over to this Midwestern family, maybe 8 of them, with Mom and Dad and the kids. He had his camera up, and I pointed at it and went into a long speech. "Sir, don't you realize just because you're from Oshkosh and we're in New York? Okay, so Cher and okay, so I'm in Kiss and I'm the guy with the long tongue." I'm like, "There is no reason why you have to take photos of us because it's embarrassing. I mean, how would you like it if I took photos of you?" And he's going, "What are you talking about? I'm just taking photos of my family." Our life together had comedy far more often than tragedy. Once we had an argument about something, but I don't argue. There is no argument with me. With Cher in New York, I was introduced to an entire other world to which I'd never thought I belonged. I went to Halston's house, and anybody who was anybody was there, from Andy Warhol to Liza Minnelli. The few conversations I had focused mainly on the fact that I was a curiosity, the guy who sticks his tongue out and spits fire. At these events, people would always be disappearing into bathrooms. I never understood what that was about. I was that naive about drugs, even at that late date, and the conversations weren't particularly interesting for me because I wasn't very interested in other people's lifestyles, even for the length of a brief conversation. To me, it was chit-chat. I've always been about the facts. Give me the information, and then it's off to the pleasure zones. But sitting around playing mahjong and sipping tea is such an empty idea to me. I just don't understand. As a result, when I met other celebrities, I wasn't too interested. Many of them were great, though. Steve Rubell always treated me terrifically. Warhol was always very cordial. "I like your art," he would say. I always thought that was a strange notion because coming from a guy who made a Campbell's soup can into pop art, I guess I understand it. All in all, the pretentiousness of the scene seemed silly to me. I always thought art should be the name of a guy, and then the rest of it should be up to the people. I believe in the American ideal, of the people, by the people, for the people. Still, however idyllic life with Cher was, I had to get back to work.
The party's over, you're in the corner, you're all alone for the night, and you pick up a phone, you wanna go home, well try your eyes, it's alright, it's alright.
Since Ace had broached the subject of solo albums during the filming of Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, I had my own solo album on my mind. I had begun working on new songs. In Kiss, we all worked differently. Usually, I would walk in and present the band with anywhere from 20 to 30 new songs. Out of my batch, we would whittle them down to 4 or 6 for an album. Peter would get a songwriting credit when and if someone brought in a song, mostly finished, and he contributed a part. Ace, on the rare occasion he actually got up to work, might come in with a few songs. Paul would usually wait until the last minute, but somehow he would always come up with the goods. I wanted my solo album to be the greatest show on earth, with choirs and tons of special guest stars. My initial vision included everyone from Lassie to Jerry Lee Lewis to Lennon, who was still alive then, and McCartney. These weren't all possible, of course. Jerry Lee Lewis couldn't make it as a result of a scheduling conflict. Lassie, too, had a scheduling conflict. As for Lennon and McCartney, I called up their management and made an offer for them to appear on the album. When they said no, I hired 2 guys from Beatlemania, the Beatles tribute stage show, to do the singing.
Mr. Make-Believe, Mr. Make-Believe, let me live inside you, please. And when you tell me what you'd like, oh yeah, you know you'll never have to fight, whoa no.
I didn't replace Jerry Lee and Lassie, but the final record included many guest appearances. Early on, I took over Cherokee Studios in Los Angeles and called on musicians from other bands to come and help me do the demos of new songs. Joe Perry from Aerosmith came down and played a killer solo on one of the new songs. Katie Segal, who I saw for a short time around the same time I was seeing Cher, and 2 other girls from the group with no name, sang on a few others. I excitedly played Cher the new songs I'd been working on, but usually a blank stare came over her face. She never really understood our music. As I went on with a solo project, I wanted to pursue my Beatles obsession, so I rented a recording studio in Oxford, England, down the road from where George Harrison lived. Any time I wanted another star to appear on the record, I flew them in and treated them like royalty. I tried to make a point, a showy point granted, that I was capable of playing guitar, so on the album I didn't play bass at all. I only played guitar. Cher and Chastity appeared on one song called Living in Sin at the Holiday Inn.
Hello, baby. I know you write me sexy letters, but sometimes my love can go too far. I'm living in sin at the Holiday Inn. At the Holiday Inn, yeah. I'm living in sin. I'm living in sin at the Holiday Inn. At the Holiday Inn. I'm living in sin at the Holiday Inn. At the Holiday Inn.
Sean Delaney produced my solo record, and he brought in Michael Kamen to arrange and conduct about 30 of the finest string players in Los Angeles. One morning they had arrived and were seated inside the recording studio, ready to do their parts on a song I'd written called Man of a Thousand Faces.
Of a thousand faces.
Sean had arranged to have them all wear Gene Simmons face masks. the ones that were for sale in stores. It was certainly one of the most bizarre moments in my life. On another occasion, I had Janis Ian at the studio at the same time Grace Slick came down to record with me. I had met Grace on tour because she was seeing our lighting director and would visit him on the road. Janis, Sean, and I were discussing some ideas when suddenly all hell broke loose. Grace had apparently ingested some chemical that didn't agree with her constitution. She flipped out, and studio staff helped her out of the studio. Other pairings were just as exciting. Helen Reddy came down to sing on a song called True Confessions.
Won't you give me confessions?
I had ping pong tables set up inside the recording studio, and Helen and I played ping pong. Donna Summer did me the favor of singing with me on Burning Up with Fever.
I'm a gifted giver, not a woman mistreater. You know there is no one else. You can have me just a one-time, baby. She said, maybe I'll give you a chance, 'cause I'm burning up with fever.
She blew the roof right off. We got along well. By that time, she'd become our record company's next big thing. Kiss was the first act to sign with Casablanca, and Donna was up and coming at the label. And Bob Seger, another hard-driving rock and roll vocalist, sang with me on Radioactive, which became the single off the record.
She's radioactive. She's very selective. She's what I need. She's so pretty indeed. She wants it all the time.
We had known Bob for many years. Earlier, he had opened for us on tour. At one of the shows, while Seeger and his band were getting ready to go on stage, I stood alongside Alto Reed, his horn sax guy. Alto mentioned that he needed something to drink. He said his mouth was dry. I offered him a piece of gum, which he said he would start chewing right away. That night was a strange one for the Seeger show. You see, at that point in my life, I loved pranks and would often buy whoopee cushions and the like. I also bought onion gum, which looks like gum and tastes like gum initially, until about the 10th chew when a hard onion taste explodes in your mouth. The solo project was unprecedented. No other group in history had ever released 4 solo albums simultaneously.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you.
Even though the solo albums were a way for Ace and Peter to feel they had a bit more creative control, we were intent on controlling the project. Both our management and our record company, Casablanca, released all 4 solo records on the same day in 1978. Insisted that each album have the same kind of artwork. We all used the same artist, Eraldo Carugati, so the entire project felt like a coordinated band solo release, something that has never been done before or since. All the albums did well. They sold strong initially and have continued to perform. After 20-plus years of sales figures, I'm at the top, slightly ahead of Ace, who is slightly ahead of Paul. Peters sold the least well of the 4. None of the albums really yielded hits. The song that got the farthest was Ace's cover of a song called New York Groove, which went to number 14.
Many years since I was here on the street, I was passing my time away. To the left and to the right, buildings towering to the sky. It's out of sight in the dead of night. Here I am again in the city with a fistful of dollars, and baby, you better believe I'm back in the New York groove. I'm back
Peter didn't chart.
Can't stop the rain. Here it comes again. Lightning strikes across the sky. Oh, I can't stop the rain. Here it comes again. Lightning only blinds my eyes.
Radioactive, my single, stopped in the 20s, and Paul's Hold Me, Touch Me was a little lower than that. The solo album was a big boost for Ace. For the first time, he was thrilled because he could walk into a room and be the only star, the guy who had his own thing going on, his own album with his own face on the cover. The irony was that when he first joined the band, he didn't want to sing or write songs. He just wanted to be the guitar player. We had forced him to start writing songs. Once he found out he could do it, he actually delivered the goods. He was able to put out an album that in a lot of ways was probably the most cohesive of the four.
It's so hard to feel right, baby. When I'm traveling around and you're far behind. God, I wish I could see my lady. Girl, I hope you don't mind. 'Cause I'm snow blind. I can't see a thing. I'm snow blind. I don't wanna sing. I'm snow blind. Need a familiar face. I'm snow blind. Think I'm lost in space.
When the four solo albums came out in late 1978, you could see the glass as half full or half empty. Selling around 500,000 copies each was nothing to sneeze at, 2 million records if you looked at them collectively as a Kiss product. But since Neil had shipped 1 million of each, what was he supposed to do with the other 2 million copies? It was too much hype, and because of the leftover records, a financial disaster for Casablanca. The solo albums did quell the need for Ace and Peter to leave, but they represented nothing more than a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. They put off something that was inevitable.
The solo albums sold about 1 million each, but Casablanca was accustomed to having 2 albums a year from us as a band, and they didn't count the solo ones. So just after that, Neil Bogart put out a greatest hits record, double platinum. I had to go back to New York and start getting ready for the next Kiss tour, and I wanted Cher and the kids to come live with me. I went to FAO Schwartz and bought a 6-foot-long bed shaped like a sneaker for Chastity. They all came with a nanny, and when Cher saw my condo, she said it wasn't big enough and moved into the Pierre Hotel. It soon became clear that if I wanted Cher to be with me in New York, I would have to finally buy a home that would suit her, so I went shopping for a larger place. Cher and I were refused at the Dakota, where John Lennon lived. We were deemed to be too much trouble, because the press was on our tail night and day. I finally found a space I thought she would like, the top floor of the former Heart Fund building, on the corner of 5th Avenue and 64th Street, across from the Children's Zoo at Central Park. There was nothing on the top floor then, so I bought air rights, which meant that I could build a dwelling on the entire top floor of the existing building. I hired Cher's architect from California and flew him to New York. While the penthouse was being built, Kiss went out on tour. When we came back home, I took the elevator up to the penthouse. It opened up into my floor. There were Romanesque columns and a giant bathtub in the middle of the larger bedroom, with marble all over the place. It was a showpiece. Cher loved it, and so did I. The problem was that by the time it was finished, Cher and I had stopped being lovers and went back to being friends. The headaches with the other 2 guys in the band continued. Peter was depressed, Ace was as infuriating as ever, and both of them were increasingly being controlled by substances. Ace's behavior was probably more interesting, although no less maddening. Ace has always struck me as never living up to his potential. He could play guitar, write songs, and do any number of other things, but he's never applied himself. He's admitted to being chronically lazy and a flake. He can put an idea together that has a spark of brilliance, but he won't go that extra mile to get trademarks and copyrights. You can see hundreds of guitar straps today, for example, with big lightning bolt designs on them, straps that are used by everyone from country acts to rap bands. That's Ace's design. He walked in one day with this strap and I said, "That's great. Let's trademark that. It'll sell like hotcakes." I had a heart-to-heart talk with him. He just wouldn't do it. After the fact, I said, "You really missed out on a big one." He said, "I'll think of another one." He never did. With these kinds of headaches in the band, there were plenty of times I would have preferred to stay with Cher. But whenever I sat down and thought seriously about things, I realized that at least at that point I would never risk breaking the band up or leaving. It was all-inclusive and invasive. So in one way I sort of forgot that I had any options. I gave myself completely to the band and defined myself that way. I was Gene Simmons from Kiss. From Kiss might as well have been my last name.
Kiss had done about 9 albums, and we also did Kiss Meets the Phantom, the first movie that they had ever done, which put a lot of strain on the group. It's a lot harder doing a movie than it was doing an album. One of the things that came out of this was that Peter and Ace especially, and also Gene and Paul, had thought it might be time to do solo albums. Well, we weren't sure whether we were going to do 4 solo albums or 1 or 2 or 1 at a time. But as it happens, we decided to do 4, thinking it would be a unique way of promoting Kiss. Also, it had never been done before. And we decided at that same time that if they were ready, we would put them all out at the same time. So effectively, it would be one huge Kiss album with separate solo albums. After finishing the solo albums, getting ready to release them all at once was quite a procedure. We had to do different ads announcing the release of the 4 solo albums, and then the planned announcements of them going gold and then platinum. As it happens, when we first released them, the first ad, instead of announcing the solo albums by Kiss, the wrong ad went out first and said they were already gold. Well, they hadn't even been released yet. So this kind of stirred the industry a bit. Then we had to actually ship the albums and start promoting the albums. At the beginning, everyone was so excited about the solo albums. Neil Bogart had decided to press over 1 million units apiece. This was more records than had been pressed for any album at that time, certainly for a release of any one album, never mind about releasing 4 albums at once. So many albums eventually got to the stores that the word on the street was there'll be more albums coming back than there were actually pressed. And there was an awkward time for the group and for the record label. There were many complications with the release of the solo albums. One were the advertisements. They had come out in the wrong order. Instead of the release of the albums, the first ad came out saying they were already gold. On top of that, the amount of pressings of the albums were uniquely high. There was over 1 million units of every album already pressed, and most of them were being sent to the stores, the large record stores and stores all over the country. So the word on the street was that more albums would come back than were actually pressed. Kept looking like we weren't selling any records. There were so many albums in every store that the piles and piles of records looked like they would never be sold. So the word in the industry was that the albums actually weren't making it and weren't being sold, and that effectively could have been a flop. The truth of the matter is they all sold over 1 million units, and eventually were one of the most successful group of solo albums ever released in the record industry.